The Bob is still not able to put weight on his foot, so he asked me to step in again. So I get to finish Malachi or Maliki or Malaki, however you want to say it. Yeah. We are in chapter 4. Now, and we kind of basically did the overview almost of the book last week when we were, trying to catch up to where we were at, and basically, right, what the book is saying, return to me, and I'll return to you, and that's what he's trying to get to him. And at the end of chapter 3, we didn't take a lot of look at it, but in verse 17 and 18, and this is what God says, and they shall be mine, and on that day I make them my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. Then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve God. So that I look at that, and it says two things to me, right? That well, actually three. The first is, I'll spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. That shows again how God feels about his remnant, the people that love him and serve him. They're his kids, they're his family, right? And then he says, you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked. And so they're not doing that now, right? They're not discerning between the righteous and the wicked. That's something we got to be careful that we could do too, is to discern between the two. And discern between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve him. And sometimes that's harder, because people can put on a face, whenever they're with God's people, and make them look like they are somebody who serves God, but they're really not. And that's one of the reasons why I think that it's good to be able to get to know each other, because then you find that stuff out easier. You find out who a person really is when they're not, sitting in the pew, when they're not in the church building together with you. So that's just a couple of things that I picked up as I was reading through this. All right, so chapter 4, only 6 verses here, but there's a little bit that's packed into this. Let's read through the first 3 and kind of look at and see if we can figure out what's being talked about there. For behold, the day is coming, and is burning like an oven, and all the proud, yes, all who do wickedly will be stubble. And the day which is coming shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts. And that will leave neither root nor branch. But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, and you shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. You shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this, says the Lord of hosts. So, and I'm not being specific here, but can you think of a time where something like this happened? And I don't have a specific time in mind, but just at first glance, looking at, kind of the things that are talked about in here, anything that might fit that the all who are doing wickedly will be stubble.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If this that one of the few times where that happened, right? Yeah.
And he says branch and root. And if If something is just burnt down to the ground, but the roots are still okay, you can regrow. If you burn the roots up, no.
Okay, yeah, so that's a problem. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so for those that know about farming, right, that's what they would do, is you harvest, like the wheat, I think it was, and then you have the stubble that's left, because you got all the stuff that's in the roots and all that. And they would go, and I don't know when they did this, if they did it every time, but you burn the field and you burn all that stubble up. And then even all the roots are gone. There's nothing, absolutely nothing left. So is there a time in history, maybe after this, where something like that happened? That this would fit? Put in our history hats on? Because it's hard, because a lot of the times, whenever something cataclysmic happens like this, that like it says, verse 3, you shall trample the wicked. But that, I don't know that that's ever happened here on this earth, where the good have trampled the wicked. There's been one people trampling another, but not the good trampling the wicked. So that's kind of a limiting factor, I guess you wanted to say on this. Yeah, you guys are having about as hard a time with it as I did. Maybe the destruction of Jerusalem, that, not only about the wicked part, but like the destroying of the root. That happened at the destruction of Jerusalem. That, the root of the Jewish nation, the culture of the Jews was all taken away with their city, and then their temple, and all of their records, which they had during the captivity. The first time Jerusalem was destroyed, they still had the root, but after that last destruction, they didn't have that. So I don't know, it could be that. All right, we'll move on. It's just that there's a day that, so he's telling these people, so 400 years before Jesus comes, that trying to encourage him, there's a day coming for the people that are paying attention and love him, that all the proud and the wicked, the people who do wickedly, will be stubble, and it's going to burn them up. No root or branch. So that people, especially in really hard times, when people are getting killed, get impaled on poles and set on fire and stuff like that. Or whenever your temple gets profaned with Antiochus Epiphanes, that's tough to go through, as people, God's people, and God's encouraging. There's going to be a time where I'm going to take care of it, because God says, "Vengeance is mine." Right, Tony?
Yeah, I'm want to reflect on Moses and how he led the people out to the promised land. He spoke the pharaohs and everything for not abiding by what God was telling them to do and let his people go. And so they were trampled down for not doing according to that word.
There's another one, okay.
And they're still suffering from it today, not following the rules of God and being punished for it.
Yeah, good. Cindy?
This makes me think about what John the Baptizer said. And Luke 3:7 says, then he said to the multitude that came out to be baptized by him, "Brood of vipers, who has caused you to flee through the wrath to come? Therefore, their fruit is worthy of repentance, and do not begin to say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. For I say to you, that God is able to raise us children of Abraham from these stones. And even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree which does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire."
Oh, yeah, so there we go, that's almost the same exact wording. Okay. But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing on his wings. So this is telling this people that this is going to happen. The Son, S-U-N, that's what mine says, right? Is that what yours said, S-U-N? So it's like a light source of righteousness is going to arise with healing in his wings. And you shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. So again, people who are farmers and do livestock, that's what they would know, what that meant. To us, it's like, we just kind of have to guess. So growing like a stall-fed calf, which I guess you have a calf that's sitting in a stall and you're just feeding it. There's no exercise, and it's gonna balloon up, right? That's what I'm guessing. That's it. Jacob, you.
Yeah, so going back more towards the top when it talks about burning the stubble. So that would be something called slash and burn agriculture. So basically burn the stubble to provide fertilizer for future crops. So that's kind of where I keep going back on this, same with the stall-fed calf is the only reason you put a calf in a stall is to pump it full of grain and make it fat for you to eat. So to me, it just kind of keeps going back and forth, like, you did this, you're burning, the wickedness and the sin out of the world to provide fertilizer for future generations.
For the good of others, for his people.
Yes,
And,
exactly.
okay. Excellent. D.
I have a reference to Isaiah 9:2. I think. Is that right? No. Isaiah 60, verse 1 and 19. Okay, Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you.
That's like that Son of Righteousness.
And verse 19, the sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory.
So that's got to be talking about Jesus, or in heaven, that fits with that, because Jesus is the light in heaven too, right? He's the sun.
Yeah.
There's no other source of light but him.
Yes,
In
God
heaven.
is glory compared with the sun.
Right. So, and
Didn't somebody just read Luke 1:78, that Christ is the rising sun from heaven?
he said Luke 1.
Luke 1:78 and 79.
Okay, so let's get a context here. Do what you did. So this is Zechariah's prophecy, the son of the father of John the Baptist, and this is what he says right at the end. Because of the tender mercy of our God, whereby the sunrise shall visit us, S-U-N, right, shall visit us from on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet on the way of peace. So good, yeah, and so that's like here's the fulfillment of what's being talked about in verse 2. And then you shall trample the wicked. At some point, the wicked's going to be trampled, and they're going to be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day that I do this. All right, anything else on that section? Then let's read the final 3 verses there. And you kind of alluded to it already. Remember the law of Moses, right? My servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all of Israel with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. So these are the last words, right? Last 3 verses before the interregnum, or the period of God's silence, no government from God or anything for 400 years. And this is what he chooses to say. So what do you get a picture of in your mind whenever he says, remember the law of Moses?
I remember the 10 Commandments.
Yeah. And remember what happened when God gave the 10 Commandments. They're on the mountain, right? And God's speaking down to all the children of Israel. Yeah. And so what weren't they doing? They weren't remembering the 10 Commandments, and he's going, remember?
But I'm saying, they're saying, what law?
Yeah. It's all Jesus now. But what does he bring up? Let's talk about verse 5. Because God mentions sending Elijah. Now, this is one of those times, if you've read through the Gospels and you're wondering and you're kind of confused about all the references to Elijah, and why did they keep bringing Elijah up? And then you come back and read Malachi, and you go, oh, that's why, because this is the last thing that God told him before he went quiet. And so the people that are his people are hanging on to that, and they're looking for Elijah, because God promised Elijah. Right? Behold, I will send Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now that's kind of scary. Emily?
The only thing it could possibly be is Christ. There's no other thing it could be. We're looking at, like you said, the last time before he has the 400 years of silence. There's nothing else it could be.
It's just off. It's too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, whenever you think about the trampling of the good over the wicked, I think back to the argument whenever he says that we will crush the snake's head.
That's good.
So-
That's good. Okay.
So who was that? Whenever, who crushed whose head?
Yeah.
It was Jesus crushing Satan's head.
Good. Good. And Dean.
The interesting thing about that prophecy, and that's the first prophecy in the Bible, is that how is it?
Yeah, that was the curse.
I will, something like that.
I will bruise his heel.
Bruise your heel,
Yeah.
and he will crush his head.
Yeah.
So a bruise to the heel is not a fatal wound, but crushing the head is faith.
Yep, yeah, exactly. So, good, excellent, excellent. Now, but there is a verse in Matthew that tells us exactly who Elijah is, because they were confused. They were asking, Jesus if he was Elijah, or people were saying that he's Elijah. So let's go over to Matthew 17 and see what Jesus says. So 17 and verse 10. And this is right after the Mount of Transfiguration, where the three apostles saw Moses and Elijah with Jesus, right? But they're coming down the mountain, and Jesus is commanding in verse 9 to tell no one about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And the disciples asked him, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And he answered and says, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come. And they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. So I don't know how much clearer Jesus has to be, but he's only talking to three apostles at the time. That the Elijah that's talking about here in Malachi is John the Baptist.
Go back to the beginning, read Matthew 11, 13 to 14.
Matthew 11, 13, and 14. So this is before John had died. And this is where John the Baptist had sent messengers to Jesus, right? And this is what, they went away, and then Jesus talks to the crowd about John. And this is what he says, for all the law, the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Again, once you know all the context and everything, Jesus is speaking pretty plainly. He's not, because he's talking, he's telling, this is to everyone though, right? And even though the one here in 17 is just to Peter, James, and John, which still obviously it's gonna be relayed later on. So other thoughts on this last section here, what we can kind of glean out here before we close Malachi up for this study anyhow.
So, regarding question 4-6.
Okay, what's the question?
He would turn the hearts of the fathers to seek the proper spiritual training for the children, and to turn the hearts of the children to the reading and faith of all Moses. And if Israel would not repent, God would strike them with a curse. Did Israel repent? Only a remnant.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and the spiritual Israel. And so what's that referring to too? Is he talking about something maybe that's earlier in the book? Because he was just hammering on the priests for not doing their job. And what was their job? Is to teach the people, right? And they didn't do that. And in his spiritual Israel, what we're living in, then the spiritual fathers are teaching the spiritual children. We need to have that. As God, well, they needed to have that too, because what happened when they didn't, they just drifted away from God, and they got so far, they weren't even following his law, which is what he's talking about. And the hearts of the children are gonna be back to their fathers. And then,
I think that, God's telling the people I've sent, Elijah, I've sent John, I've sent Moses, they all have the same message, you know, and if it's one or the other, they're all one, you know, with the same message that they're coming to the people with. Obey, be obedient, you know, do as I tell you to do. And basically, they keep repeating the same thing over, just like the Bible repeats the same message over and over.
and, because God knows that's the most critical thing in our life. For us to return to God and be a part of his family.
The last thing to ask is, what impressed you most in this study of the book of Malachi? And for me, it's chapter 3, verse 7, return to me, and I will return to you.
Yeah, that would be probably the key verse in the book.
I have a reference, in verse 6 back to Zechariah 12. And it says, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all people that have fought. Shall consume away, their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away, and their holes and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. That really sounds a lot like radioactive, yeah, or a blast, you know.
Yeah, but it fits the destruction of Jerusalem with all of them, you know, them gathered into the temple and it being burned down with them inside. That kind of fits that as well. All right, so any closing thoughts on Malachi? Must we hit the essence of it, I think? All right. So, next week, we should be starting in Acts. And who's gonna be teaching that? I don't know.
Do we have material?
I don't think that we have material yet for it. Bob was working on that. So, now, in the few minutes that we have left, let's talk about just kind of off the top of our head, what do you think of Acts? What do you know of Acts to kind of just get us warmed up?
The history of the church.
Say again?
The history of the church.
So that's the history of the church, the history of the young church, right?
Beginning of the
And
church.
yeah, the beginning of the church. Excellent. Kim. Up until, and then Paul.
How the gospel spread far and wide. And the first 10 or 11 chapters are really good to go to show what people did when they first heard the word and responded. You know, the repentance, the baptism, you know, there's like a different person in every chapter, every other chapter, there's another account of conversion of people here in the world. So it's a great place to go to teach the laws.
But I think what all these people do whenever they felt the need to turn to God, what did God's people tell them? Excellent. Other acts, what are other ideas on Mike?
The message Gentiles, Cornelius, now extended beyond just the Jews. So the kind of good news is for everybody. One of the things I like is Paul's sermon on Mars Hill, Athens, the unknown God, and who that is. It's really wonderful.
Right. So, yeah, Acts 17, and then Acts 10 for Cornelius, a couple of huge turning points, even having God's prophets standing in a place like Mars Hill and speaking to them. Yeah, big deal.
When I there is Stephen recounting the entire Old Testament history, and Paul's standing there holding the beautiful Stephen recounted all so clearly for them to understand that they didn't face them at all. Their hearts were so hardened.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that I didn't realize for the longest time that's what that was. That if you wanted like a brief synopsis of the Old Testament, you could go right there to what Stephen told them. I wonder, whenever he went through all that, how did that compare with what they were thinking at the time of what their history was? Was it good? Was it bad? Did it match? Did it not match what they were thinking? At the end, they were closing their ears, right? Because they got so mad because of what he said against them, and because they're following not the law, but they were following their Mishnah, right? They were following their oral traditions, and they were following the teaching of the rabbis, along with the Torah as well. So who knows how much added stuff there was, or wrong takes on it, or whatever. And he was just telling them straight up from those first 5 books. Other thoughts on Acts? Cindy?
I think Acts is very interesting in the way that the righteousness of God is revealed through the book of Acts, and how God had planned to save all nations. The promise to Abraham is now being seen and witnessed and is being active. That not just Jews are saved, but now Gentiles are saved. And how are they saved? They're saved through the gospel, the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And the world just blew up because of that.
Yeah, it was a world-shaking event, and you could see the start of it. You rarely have that kind of a history, especially the people that were right there in the beginning and the middle of it.
And just to piggyback on how much of the paradigm shift this was in difficult folks. We see in chapter 5, in this council, verse 39, but if it is God, we will not be able to overthrow him, talking about Peter and the apostles, or else he may have be fighting against God.
Yeah. But you don't find yourself fighting against God. But so many people do. Other thoughts on Acts? I don't know. For me, this has kind of piqued my interest. So I'm looking forward to looking at this more in detail. And we can go ahead and close it there. And we'll start in afresh at Acts next week.
Now,
Right? Okay, so she hasn't been driving.
No.
Oh, so yeah, that's good.
There no, yeah.
Oh?